Welcome to another edition of Spits and Suds. So glad that you can join us. Wow, we have a great show today. Special guest, Keith Kaval, the first North American referee to work the KHL. And prior to that, I mean, Keith, this resume is amazing. Let me just go over it real quick. American Hockey League for a long time. The East Coast Hockey League, NCAA, of course, the IIHF, the Danish League, the old CHL right here around Texas, the United Hockey League, known for its craziness. Can't wait to ask you about that. Referee in the World Juniors, currently the director of officiating for the NAHL, which is a lot of times based here right in Dallas. So in total of 30 years as an official, and now he is training and teaching officials. Keith, thank you so much for joining us on Spits and Suds. This is going to be awesome.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to connect. And yeah, you said in the beginning the first North American to ever referee in Russia, and to be quite honest, maybe I might be the last one. So no, it was a unique experience, and no, it's excited to be a part of the North American Hockey League. Under our commissioner Mark Frankenfeld's leadership, and our 35 teams that are flush across the country with some great owners that support our officiating program, right? They do a great job in their individual market of supporting and developing players to get to the next level, whether that's college commitments, pro commitments, and obviously we can't do what we do on the officiating side without their support. And no, it's a really it's a great place to be from, and we're excited about what we're currently doing and continue to evolve in this ever changing hockey landscape.
It's such a great league. We were talking before we started that the NAHL does not get the credit that it deserves as a terrific developmental league for the NCAA. And it's great that they have assets like you. And there are so many cool cities and what they give to these kids. I know a good friend of mine, his son played for the Shreveport Mudbugs, and the experience kind of set the tone for, now he's in the NCAA, but his experience was absolutely amazing in Shreveport, and how that city embraced these kids, and the various community activities that they can do to help nonprofits, just giving back to the cities as well. So, it's just great because, you're seeing these kids grow up, and they have to grow up fast because, they still are kids, and we have to remember that.
No, absolutely. I think that's one of the cool things you kind of hit on. These teams do a great job of integrating their players out in the community, right? Doing things with schools and charity work and whatever, right? It's not just the daily grind of hockey, right? I think it's very well rounded in the things that they're teaching and working with these guys to be out to work, to give back. And I think that certainly makes them a well-rounded person and a well-rounded player, right? Which is attractive to these schools when they're looking to make commitments with these kids and offer potential scholarships and so forth. So, but like you said, Shreveport, Lone Star Brahmas, a lot of the former Central Hockey League markets, right? Pro markets, people with a crazy appetite for hockey, rough and tumble, and these kids that they play a 60+ schedule plus playoffs. They're tested, right? They're tested on the ice, they're tested off the ice. Plus, they still obviously have their commitment to school, and it's really amazing to see what these coaches, what these owners do for these players. But the players, they bring that as well, right? It's a great combo, and no, I mean, there's a lot of great markets doing great things out in the public, which is awesome, and certainly something that I think the North American Hockey League is well known for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, doing my research to talk to you, it reminded me of when I was coming through the ranks of radio, because I remember seeing my program director, and I thought to myself at one point, I mean, I was just a young kid, basically in college, and I said, boy, I never want to do that job. And here I am years later, 30 years running radio stations, doing that same job and loving it. And, to be a part of sports radio has allowed me to be a part of sports in some way. So it's fascinating how we find our niche. And you started as a goaltender, and doing my deep dive on you, I've heard some interviews where you talked about you weren't the biggest fan of officials, and then you ended up as one.
Yeah, not at all. You know what? It was funny. I guess you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think sometimes people see, even, we deal with things, right? The abuse and stuff like that, unfortunately, in the youth hockey rinks and even higher up. I think sometimes people see the jersey, right? And whether you're watching a Dallas Cowboys game and you can wonder why there's so many officials on the field with all these different video angles, and sometimes the call's missed, right? And we get passionate, we get upset about things, and you know what, we take that out, we yell at the television, right? Or same thing with baseball. You're watching a Rangers game, and they put up that box, right, for the strike zone, and we're like, what is this guy watching, right? I think
Yeah.
for me as a goaltender, I thought the job was honestly easier than what it was. And, I got into some penalty trouble with the goaltender and got suspended. And, to kind of get my release or kind of, try to make amends, I got pulled into officiating. And honestly, my very first game, I'm on the ice. It's a youth game. I think it was like a 12U game, and it's just two of us officials. And obviously, I was with an experienced official, but there's so many things that you take for granted, right? Like you got to get to the blue line to make the call. You got parents screaming at you. You got the coaches screaming at you, and you've got to blow the whistle. You got to do this. You got to do that. And my perspective really changed after that. And I'm like, wow, this is way, way more difficult than I thought. And I kind of gravitated towards really liking it and ultimately loving it because you learn so much about the game. You get deeper into the game. You learn to build relationships with the players and the coaches and try to earn their respect, right? And there's certain skills that you can take from the ice and take that to the real world, right? So in terms of honoring those commitments to be up at that 7 a.m. game and try to serve the game the right way and do the best job you can. And, do you always get the pat on the back? No. Do you always get a handshake? No. But at the end of the day, there were so many things that I learned and gained that helped me in life and honestly kind of spurred me on to kind of pursue officiating. And to be fair, I really never thought, I would get to the levels I got to and be able to travel around the world or be on the ice, with a Connor McDavid or a Sidney Crosby at a world championship or, skate in Russia, right? That I was started out as youth hockey. It was an opportunity to get some extra money in my pocket and you know what, try to give back to the game and just to learn that side of it and kind of fall in love with it. I feel very fortunate because obviously I'm still in the game and I'm very fortunate to work, for the North American League in the capacity of director of officiating. And no, it's funny how sometimes things like you said earlier, right? You get a job where someone's like, I don't want to. I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but ultimately it's been super rewarding for me and within my career and obviously my life.
All right, two parts. I don't think people realize the development of an official and the development that USA Hockey provides to you guys. And the second part is much of that training is a mindset, because I obviously have to search a lot of hockey news and I just see parents with, like, for instance, in the NAHL, there's a lot on the line for parents as much as kids because, parents have to pay a lot for these kids. And, Division One, Division Two, Division Three scholarships on the line. That's a lot of money for the parents. So they want what's best for their child. So if a call goes against them, and I'm just fascinated with the discipline and learning the discipline because of all the videos I see. I can't remember an official like being the aggressor or in any way like fighting back or anything like that. And just to me, that must take some serious training of your own mindset.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into this answer, right? I think the biggest thing for our officials is just getting the reps, right? You have to get game experience. no one starts out and they're going to be ultimately the best, right? And we work on communication, we work on positioning, we work on all the different fundamentals of being able to put yourself in the right sight line to be able to see what you need to see and either make a call or sometimes more importantly a non-call, right? So there's so much that goes into it, and you talk about the expectation. That's one of the toughest things that we have to deal with on a management side because again, I don't think there's ever an official or group of officials that are going to go out and go, you know what, we're not gonna bring our best tonight, or we have something against the Shreveport Mudbugs, or we have something, against the Minot Minotauro. So, um, it's honestly it's game experience, right? We're fortunate of the money that's invested within our teams, obviously, to do what we do. But the support from USA Hockey is great, right? We have many NHL retired officials that have become supervisors, or as we like to call them, coaches, right? So for the two coaches that are on the opposing benches, right, we often have an officiating coach up in the stands that's there working with our officials, right, and coaching them through situations and trying to reinforce, hey, maybe we could have done this differently, or hey, that's a great call, whatever it is. And credit to our teams, right? They get what we're doing, they understand it. Sometimes unfortunately our worlds collide, right? And we can get in the way, unfortunately, whether a bad call or a misinterpretation or something like that. But I think they would be pretty quick to say as well, you know what, sometimes the defenseman flubs the puck in the slot, and guess what, there's a turnover and it's in the back of the net, right? But unfortunately, I think often, right, in sports in general, sometimes our mistakes loom a lot larger, right? And it's working through that with our officials. And some guys and gals that we have on staff, they pick it up, they become more competent. They graduate to our Robertson Cup playoffs and a championship, and they move up and move on, no different than the players that seek that commitment. But some don't, right? And some struggle with communication. I always joke with some of our teams, right? And they deal with the same thing, right? With the players. Yeah, obviously, we have a whistle, they have a stick, but some of our guys, they're buried in their phone, right? They're playing video games. Maybe their communication skills aren't as sharp. And when you're dealing with savvy, experienced coaches that have played at a high level and now are coaching at our level, right? You're going to be challenged. And some of our officials can figure it out. Some of them can learn from their mistakes and get better, but some don't, right? And that's for us. I currently manage over 350 plus officials within our program. So, between the North American Hockey League and then our sister league, the NA3, which is a tad bit lower, that's a great training ground for our officials to figure things out, to work on different skill sets, to work on their communication, and maybe a little bit of a less hostile environment. And obviously, we don't take those games for granted, but certainly, the pace of play might be a little bit less. And you know what? You can kind of figure out things on the fly a little bit easier. But yeah, in terms of expectation and abuse, I mean, I think we just saw that unfortunate video out in Seattle of the
Hmm.
parent walking on the ice, and I just there's so many emotions that run through my mind because at times people are like, oh, it's hockey, it's emotion, it's this, and I'm like, no, it's abuse. It's you know you have to think that's someone's kid out on the ice, right? And it's again, I think we go back to we talked about the other officials in other sports, right? You don't know that person, right? You don't know them personally, whatever, but you see the uniform. And at times I think you see that person that they're getting in the way of your son or daughter's win or their expectations, right? You talked about commitments of college and so forth. Um, you know, we go out there, we try to do the best job we can. We try to equip our officials with as much skill sets, right? The communication, the rule knowledge, reinforcement, stuff like that, to try to navigate that stuff. But my thoughts go out to those young kids, and obviously I know some former officials that I used to work with that graduate to the National Hockey League. I know that they're going to do some good stuff behind the scenes out at a Kraken game to kind of say, hey, one, we hope you're okay. Two, thank you for being involved in officiating, and we hope that this act doesn't deter you or quite frankly anyone else. Because honestly, we need those type of kids to grow up and graduate, that they want to skate junior hockey, they want to skate minor pro hockey. Maybe they aspire to be a National Hockey League official. Maybe they aspire to be just the best darn local official, right? The best darn high school official. But those type of acts and those type of scenes, it's upsetting, right? It's hard to watch. And I know from our side, all we can continually do is try to reinforce and support our officials with the education process to help them try to maneuver. But honestly, I think in the long term, it's about cooperation. It's cooperation with the players, the coaches, the parents, and we all need to coexist. And we don't always have to agree, but without officials, there's no game. And without teams, there's not us as
Right.
well. But ultimately, we have to find some common ground, because at the end of the day, scenes like that are unacceptable. And like I said to someone, I go, I don't know if I was in their shoes or their skates, would I continue officiating? Right. And
Yes.
that's how we lose a lot of those officials, because they're like, you know what? Heck with this. I'm going to go to McDonald's and flip burgers,
Right.
because you know what I mean? Like, it's all about the environment.
Yeah.
But certainly it was a tough watch. But I mean, from our perspective, all we can do is try to just develop our officials and give them the tools that they need to be successful on and off the ice.
I mean, you were a young guy and you survived the United Hockey League. I don't know how you survived that league. That was a drop the mitts, go, well, drop everything and go. I mean, that's a while back. I talked with Eric Nadel, who, I mean, and, probably this dates you, but he was talking about some arenas had chicken wire
Yeah.
above. And I don't know if you had to face that, but I mean, you face some people that, I mean, the swinging of sticks, let's just say, and other things that happened to you as an official. It's pretty. That was, boy, talk about learning on the fly.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, you see the documentary on Netflix about the Danbury Trashers, right?
Yes.
I skated there, right? I worked some games there, and yeah, that's real, right? Like, you can look at the video and stuff like that, but no, I lived it and went through it. And um, funny story, I'm working a game there, and if you followed the documentary, the Galantes, right, were the owners, the son, obviously, and the father, and all that good
Of
stuff. And
course. Yeah.
they were up, they have a suite at center ice. And this rink, which obviously now we have, the Danbury Hat Tricks are in our North American League as a junior team, but it's the same building. And honestly, it was, at the time, it was a youth hockey rink on steroids, right? They had the big screen at the one end, and the fans, like, it was packed to the max, and maybe 2,000 max, but it was just a raucous crowd, and they really got behind those characters. And I can remember something happened. And all of a sudden I hear a voice screaming from the top of the rink up in the suite, and they're like, "We know where you're parked." So adjacent to the rink, there's a parking garage. And it was funny. Probably the next shift, someone put a stick on one of the Trasher players. They slashed him, and yeah, my arm went up. Right, so it was like, I wanted to survive. I wanted to get in and get out of the rink, but no, there was times when I remember a player didn't like a call or a no call that I made, and he went to swing a stick at me and almost hit me. Right, and
Wow.
you know what? It was kind of learning on the fly, and you're trying to survive. And maybe to date myself, but it was 2005-ish, 6-ish. I think at the time we had the NHL lockout, so we had, Motor City had like Chelios and Hatcher, and
Yep.
they had some players of significant ilk. And even in the Central League, like, I kind of bounced around within our program, skating some different pro leagues, right? And like Brad Lukowicz was skating, right? And you're dealing with guys at the highest level, and now they're coming down. And some of those challenges were, you had some kids, right? Young, and not talking kids, but minor league players. They wanted to make a name for themselves, right? They wanted to go after these pros that obviously they're watching on Fox Sports or watch on Bally's, on ESPN, whatever. And us as a young official trying to make my way up, you're trying to manage these emotions. You're trying to manage, a guy that's making maybe $200 a week going after a millionaire.
Yeah.
So Yeah, there was some times when you just kind of gave your head a shake and you're just like, wow, what's going on? And obviously I think the level of play and the game has cleaned up considerably over time between the rules and just the skill and speed. But yeah, some of that stuff we kind of joke about now. I don't know if today's official could manage some of those things back then, because some of the stuff we went through, it you know what, it thickens your skin, makes you learn on the fly, and you're tested night in, night out with different personalities, different people, and traveling city to city and stuff like that. So no, it was a time, and some nights it seemed more like WWE wrestling than it did hockey, and you shake your head after the game, and you're happy that you got through it. You take some of the lessons that you learned from it, and you try to apply that to the next assignment. But yeah, it was wild times, and I'm glad to see where the game is at now
Yeah.
at the pro level and the skill set and everything like that. But yeah, it was wild.
So something as crazy as that. I mean, the documentary is obviously tells the story of the Danbury Trashers and tells the story of the family. But did you know the story when you were officiating? Because when they say we know where you park, that's not just a regular fan saying we know where you park.
There was whispers, right? I mean, I don't think anyone knew to the extent, right? And at the time, bouncing around the different leagues I was working, I didn't spend a ton of time, refereeing them. Perhaps, maybe at the time I was more in the Midwest, so I was seeing Rockford and Quad City and some of those other teams a little bit more than seeing Danbury. But there was whispers, obviously, like, "Hey, this is going on." And then, I mean, just some of the names of the players that they had on their roster, right? Because I mean, everyone knows like a salary cap, and you're like, wait a second, like this team's got like a who's who, right? Of top minor league players, and then some of the top fighters and all that stuff. So I mean, you know what? I don't think we took a deep dive into it to like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. But certainly there was whispers, and I'm sure probably some of my other fellow officials probably would know a little bit better because they were dealing with it on a more regular basis. But certainly you knew going into that building, or having them on the road, it was going to be a challenge within itself, and obviously the other team was going to answer for themselves too. But yeah, it was crazy, and like I said, happy to learn from it, happy to get through it. But yeah, it was, I think that documentary captured a lot of it. But
Sure
certainly,
did.
I can't sit here and say, yeah, we knew all the facts at the time. But no, what an interesting story, what an interesting time in
Yeah.
hockey. And no, it's, just to have a small part of that and be, to be able to be on the ice, and like they were skilled. They played well. They had some really good players, but you know what? They were also physical. They could fight you. They could do whatever ever they want, right? They were a well constructed team. So
I mean, I don't know if it's you choose your frosty, whether it's water or it's an actual frosty. I mean, you would be absolutely amazing for story time because your stories are terrific. So I'm just going to bounce around leagues and feel free to let it fly because a lot of the questions I'm going to ask are questions that I've always wondered. Never wore a USA sweater or any kind of, never got to play for the country, but obviously, just like many, have great pride in USA hockey. So, as a referee who was developed through the USA hockey system, the mindset of going into an international competition and, say, playing a Canada or a Russia or countries like that, I mean, you basically have to take the USA off and just play neutral. That's, to me, like, that's a fascinating mindset in itself.
no, for sure. And I think with the double IHF at the time, right when we were coming up, you weren't allowed to referee your country, right? So whether I was doing a U18, which I know is coming back to Frisco here in a couple
Yeah.
of months, which will be fantastic hockey with the future of the NHL on display. But whether it's U18 or the World Juniors, sometimes your performance you could have a gold medal type of tournament as an official, right? You could make the right calls and really score well. But if USA's in a gold medal, guess what?
You're not. Okay.
I'm not exactly. So, um, one of my first U18s, which was in Fargo at the time, and USA, right? They had like a Jack Campbell was in goal, right? Former star. You had some really high end kids. They made the gold medal game, so I ended up being assigned to a bronze medal game, which the part that I've always said, right, when I was on the ice is, you know what, if USA as a team is doing well, and they're in a gold medal, I don't mind skating a bronze medal game, right? Because them as a hockey team, they're doing well, and it's unfortunate I can't work that game, but you know what, there's some pride that the team's playing well, but the one highlight or really cool opportunity or moment was in Buffalo, New York, in the 2011 World Juniors. I got selected to work the gold medal game between Russia and Canada. And the arena in Buffalo was packed to the gills with all the Canadians coming over the Peace Bridge, and it was a sea of red. And Russia, right? Like they had Tarasenko, they had some great players, and obviously, Canada had a great team assembled. And for two periods, Canada's up 3-0. And for some of your listeners, the third period, Russia scores five unanswered,
Wow.
and it went from a raucous, let's get ready to party, to Russia coming, and just the third period, it was crazy. I think they scored three goals within the span of a couple minutes, and Canada couldn't recover, and it just went from an electric atmosphere to, I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in the arena, right? And it was one of those moments where we took pride as an officiating crew, because you know what, our fingerprints weren't on the game. The players played the game. It played out itself, and it was some tremendous hockey, right? So you get that opportunity to have, to be able to skate in your own country in front of that many fans with that much on the line with future NHLers, and you can walk away from the game knowing that you did the job that you were asked to do. And no one talked about officiating, right? Everyone talked about the game. Everyone talked about the incredible comeback by Russia. So, going back to your original point, with there's a ton of pride, um, and I'm obviously very thankful for everything that USA Hockey is enabled me to do, both on and off the ice. But that those type of moments, right? Being able to be on the ice in those big moments, and go out and just do your job to the best of your ability, is something that I take a ton of pride in.
So the other night, the hockey world was specifically on social media ablaze, which is a good thing, talking about four nations and three fights in 9 seconds. A lot of times, do you guys know going in when you hit the ice, hey, they might drop the mitts? And the purpose of those three fights, like from a guy looking from the outside, that has so many years of officiating, was that something that you automatically know, yeah, you know what, these guys need to get it out of their system?
Yeah, you could feel it, right? And you could tell. You can tell. Obviously, I think that's one of the skill sets, right? It's just having that intel of, okay, who's on the ice, right? Knowing the players and knowing the stakes of the particular game. Maybe knowing the history, right? I mean, obviously in minor league hockey or even our junior hockey league, right? Sometimes, depending on how far away the teams are, we'll play, unfortunately, 3-3, or five in a row. And sometimes we as officials, you have to manage that, right? You have to manage. It's not just managing a 3-period game. I mean, if you have a 3-3, you might be managing a 9+ period game, right? And sometimes there's carryover from a particular game, maybe an incident, maybe controversy, all these different things. Um, but watching that the other night, you know, one, shame on you, Gary Bettman, for not having more of this in the National Hockey
Yeah,
League. No one wants to see a no-touch All-Star game. So,
right.
I think the hockey's been incredible. I think the atmosphere has been incredible. And I certainly hope, in the championship game coming up here on Thursday, I hope that we see some of those same things. But back to your original question, yeah, you know what? Sometimes those things in the game that you can feel it, that it needs to happen, right? And I think for USA on that, they knew that they were going to be in a rough place, right? You're in Montreal. It's you against a crowd. They're booing our anthem. There's so many other things that are going on. And listen, I don't think the fans are booing maybe all the players,
Right.
but
Yeah.
obviously there's some love hate between
Sure.
some of the guys that play against the Canadians, everything like that. And you have a very rich, savvy hockey fan base there, and I was fortunate. I did an exhibition game there at the Bell Center, and just an exhibition game, and the atmosphere was incredible. So I could only imagine what the atmosphere was like that night, right? I think it translated very well on television. But for USA, I think what they were like, hey, we're gonna have to ride out the first 5 to 10 minutes of this game, right? They're gonna have to try to get into it, and you know what? I don't blame them for being the aggressor in some of those situations. And obviously, kudos to Canada for obliging, right? Because sometimes you don't have to respond, you don't have to fight. But there's passion there. There's
Yeah.
passion for playing for your country. When you're able to wear that on your crest of your jersey, right? That logo, that flag. I mean, it just shows you the passion and the pride that those players have, and I think that's what our game needs more of, right? And
Yeah.
it's just, I thought it was. Listen, I'm not always the big advocate of fighting, but for those guys and what they did in that particular situation, you know what? They settled into the game. They were down a goal, but they got into their game. They played with structure and they played well, and they kept some of the a McDavid, a Crosby, they kept them off the board, right? And they played well defensively, and that set the tone for the game. So, you know what? I'm sure there's people outside of hockey who are going, oh, they're fighting because of the countries and our president and all this stuff. And no, they were fighting because they're proud to wear that crest, to represent their country,
Hmm.
and to really, honestly, you can't manufacture that display the other night. That was amazing
Yeah.
hockey. We haven't seen it in a long time, best on best, and I certainly hope that this spurs on the league to do more of that, because it's better than just watching a no-touch All-Star game.
Right, and we haven't seen it because in Olympic competition the rules are different also. So I mean,
Yeah,
that better than most. So you
yeah,
wouldn't
I
see
almost.
three fights in 9 seconds international play like that.
No, and I almost wonder if the people in Zurich at the IIHF offices were cringing because,
Yeah.
but to be fair now being on the side now, obviously now I work for the IIHF as an officiating supervisor coach. A lot of the rules now mimic the National Hockey League, so they've come around, and they understand that too. The game has evolved, the game has changed, and a lot of the rules are not as penal as they once were. But yeah, would that happen at the Olympics? I don't know,
Right.
but it was fun to watch the other night, and I'm excited to see their next matchup for all the marbles.
Okay, on that note, we talk on Spits and Suds about the art of fighting, how it can change momentum, how it can protect players. There's purposes for that. But there's an art of officiating as far as when to allow it, when to jump in. How's the training for that?
I mean, honestly, you know what? We just had a situation. I don't know. Probably some of your listeners probably might have saw it live at North Richland Hills. We
Uh-huh.
had a doozy of a line brawl, and you know, backstory: the two teams, Corpus Christi and Lone Star, they were playing, I believe, either five in a row
Yes.
against each other, split up between the buildings and whatever. And I was actually there. I was there live. Lucky me. And up in the stands there to coach the officials. And I was there Friday night, and it was a ho hum 3-1 victory by Corpus. So Saturday going into it, I knew there was going to be significant pushback by Lone Star, right? They have a very proud team program. They're defending North American Hockey League champions. Their coach, Dan Wildfung, who was a Central Hockey League legend, who I had Had the pleasure of trying to manage as an official in the Central Hockey League. He was kind of like the Brad Marchand, you know what I mean? You turn your head, and next thing you know, you'd see a player laying in a heap, and he's kind of smiling. So you knew he probably took a stick to the guy, but he was also a prolific scorer. So I mean, him managing the bench there, I knew there was going to be significant pushback, and um, we're up until that point before this big brawl, there was 15 penalties called by our officiating crew. So I mean, we weren't necessarily just letting stuff go, but we were aware like they're playing hard. And like you said earlier, when you play that much against each other, right? It's cumulative, right? It's that 9 period game. There's carryover, whatever. And I'm sitting up in the bleachers, up high in the rafters essentially, and one of our other officiating coaches made the trip with me, Dan Monticelli. He looks at me, and this is a true story. He looks at me probably, I'd say 4 to 5 minutes before this happened, before the start of the fight. And he goes, I'm feeling Talladega. And I look at him, I go, excuse me? And he goes, I'm feeling Talladega. I go, what? He goes, the big one. The big one's coming.
Wow.
And sure as anything, the next thing you know, we have a delayed penalty. And then everyone is jumping people. And we had players jump the bench. And like I give our crew a ton of credit. They tried to manage it the best way you can. Um, am I going to sit here and say I'm particularly happy at what we saw? No. And I'm very thankful that none of the players um, were injured, because I think you're dealing with people that don't, kids. I mean, we're dealing with 16 to 20 or 16 to 21-year-olds, right?
Hmm.
And you've got some of the kids that are still wearing cages because you have to wear a cage until you're 18, and then you can make the choice of wearing a half visor. Um, and it was just watching. It's like you can't prepare the officials or the players for that matter to be able to handle that, right? Like you can watch a video and we can talk about certain things, whatever, but until you live it, you just don't know. And your adrenaline, your heart's freaking beating a mile a minute. And as linesmen, right, we instruct them, right? You got to work together and try to break up, um, the fights when obviously when you're done. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way, but you also want to make sure no one's taking advantage of the situation, right? If you have a player that's maybe, beating the snot out of another guy that's kind of turtling, right? So, back to your original thing talking about, fighting and maybe its purpose in the game. At the pro level, I understand it more, right? It's a different animal. These guys are battling for paycheck. They're battling, to establish themselves in this and that. And I've always said, as from my perspective as an on-ice official, I would rather see two guys square up and mutually fight versus the stick work, versus the dirty hits, versus the elbows, right? Um, you look at somebody like a Rempe running around at
Yeah.
times, and a player of his size, those guys can do serious damage when they're hitting players, right? And how do you control that, right? And obviously, sometimes what there's a response, and it involves dropping the gloves, but. I don't mind the fighting at the pro level. Junior hockey, I'm not crazy about, because you might have a kid that's seasoned that, you could have a 20-year-old fighting a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
Is that ideal? Probably not. But that's, and listen, back in the day in junior hockey, it was so common, right? Like when
Right.
I was on the ice and, the Texas Tornado were playing out of that same building there, it was every weekend. And we always joked, like, when there was a line brawl or there was other shenanigans, I'm pretty confident we didn't handle it very good the first couple times, but the more reps we got, the better we got at it, right? To how do you handle it? What do you do? What are our tactics? How do we stay safe ourselves? How do we keep the players safe? Um, but yeah, that was a crazy experience, and I give our guys credit, like I said, for trying to manage a situation like that,
Yeah.
and just thankful that the players weren't hurt.
Right.
Obviously,
Or the
what
officials.
or the officials too. Obviously, absolutely right. But it's you always look at it. The one thing I've always said at doing this job, right, is being a director of officials, um, is being able to look through their lens. And when I say their lens, I'm talking about the teams, right? And understand where they're coming from. And hopefully I'm able to convey a message of where we're coming from, right? And again, we talk about cooperation and we talk about us working to the best of our ability, but understanding that there's certain things in the game that are going to happen and how do we manage that, right? So I understand where they're coming from at times. Sometimes I don't agree with it and they don't always agree with us, but that's hockey, right? That's sport. And like I said, fortunately, no one was severely hurt.
Right.
And I know the crowd.
Real quick on
Oh,
that. Just
yeah.
from an officiating standpoint, you talked about when to get in.
Mhm.
Similar to a perfect check, there has to be a body angle. And I'm wondering, as an official, like for instance, their face can be vulnerable.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a position that you teach where they keep their chin down or to the side or something? Or is it just hands first, go in? You know, obviously you want your complete vision, but at the same time, turn to the side. So, I mean, is there any of that, or is it just instinct from an officiating standpoint?
I think a lot of it's like communication, right? Letting them know, hey, we're in the vicinity when they're doing when
Got it.
if they're squared up, right? We're letting them know. Like obviously we're monitoring the situation. We want to make sure that there isn't an advantage, disadvantage situation where someone could be potentially injured or the fight's over, right? Maybe the player loses his jersey over his head, right? And is in a vulnerable position and can't protect himself. So we're constantly evaluating those type of situations. Now you go back to that line brawl, we're evaluating, six different potential situations, right? And it's like, okay, our mindset as officials are, okay, where do we go? What is the most important place to go on the ice? Who needs our help as officials? Where do we need to go to break up, a potential maybe mismatch, right? So it's that mindset. Like we can't practice this, right? We can't go to the rink at 2 o'clock and go, okay, we're gonna mimic this. We're gonna
Sure.
simulate a line brawl. So you know what? Do we get it right all the time? No. And there was some really good teaching moments out of that we worked on watching the video and having that discussion. But when you get to the highest levels, right? When you're downtown watching a Stars game, right? You're watching the best of best officials, and there's a certain level of respect that the players have. And for every, I think Rampe had a greasy hit there, and um, you know, those type of players, they're on your radar. You know who those players are. You know when they're on the ice. You're just aware. You
Okay.
have to be, right? And some people say, "Oh, you guys are profiling, or you're going out of your way to pick on somebody." I think you'd be crazy or stupid not to know your who's on the ice, right? I always talk to our officials about inventory. Take inventory. Who's on the ice? Because if you have one team's first line and the other team puts out their fourth line, and no disrespect to the fourth line because they could be an energy, high energy, or grind line, but can they keep up? What are they doing? What tactics are they using to try to stop that first line, right? So again, there's a lot of things that go into it that maybe people don't think, right, about, but it's certainly things that we teach and we try to plant those seeds of like, hey, the score's 5-0, right? That team is either going to mail it in the rest of the game that's down, or they're gonna make a statement because guess what? Periods 4, 5, and 6 are tomorrow,
Yeah.
right? And some teams won't go away quietly. So that's another part of the game at times we have to manage, but we have to be aware of too. So it's, I think for us, everything is about evaluating the certain situations. What can we do to minimize problematic places, right? And obviously, everything goes back to safety. And sometimes these kids don't know how to fight. Sometimes these kids, maybe that is their first
Sure.
fight. And we talk about the code, right? Pro players know the code. Seasoned players know the code of, maybe you're not throwing that extra punch when that player's vulnerable or when the linesmen are in and they have the players separated. And you've seen it before at a Stars game where maybe one linesman has the one player's arms tied up and the other guy's still swinging, right?
Yeah.
That's a real thing that, we as officiating coaches trying to work with our guys to teach them, hey, how do we break this up? What angle are we coming in from, right? The one thing I tell our linesmen, don't come in from the back of the player
Ooh,
because the,
good
the, the
point.
player, the player may feel that's another player coming in. Maybe
Yeah.
it could be the opposition could be a third man in situation. So between communication going, hey, linesman, I'm here, whatever it is, or talking to the player, hey, Sudsy, this is what we're doing, whatever. That's important. And sometimes, as you know, right, in the heat of the game, you could say whatever you want to say. Those players might not hear that,
Right.
right? They're so engulfed in the situation, they may not recognize that voice or whatever, right? So that's, another element that sometimes we have to manage, right? So those are the things we teach.
Okay.
But originally, like I said, you can't simulate it. You can watch videos. You can say, yeah, this guy did this wrong or whatever. And, you know, it's never perfect,
Right.
but it's always an opportunity to learn, to grow from it. And like I told the guys afterwards, I thought they did as well of a job as they could under the circumstances. But it all goes back to cooperation between the benches and the game being played. And it was just kind of cumulative of how many times they played, and you know what, there was some bad blood, and it spilled over. And
Yeah.
you just got to manage it in front of you and do the best you can.
So it's talked about a lot, evening up the penalties. And how do we dispel that as far
Yeah.
as at the end of the game? And I know we had, the unfortunate episode a few years back where one of the NHL referees, was caught on a hot mic and mentioned something to that effect.
Yeah.
But, talk to me about that, because even when I see 6 minutes on the board for one team and none for the other, I said, well, things are going to change in a moment or two.
They can. I think, and one of the things that we've always coached or tried to coach, there's going to be opportunity, during a game where unfortunately you have no other choice but to take both players. I think the one thing that will deter certain actions in a game is taking a differential. And what I mean by that is who starts the situation, right? Perhaps you're watching a game and a player gets hit from behind, and then you have a big pileup. And obviously the referee has the first penalty for a board, um, but then there's some retaliation. How do we try to eliminate those type of acts in a game? Because I'll be honest with you, if I'm going after your best player with, maybe again we talked about first line versus fourth line, and let's say one of your skilled guys is hit from behind, a Rope Hintz is hit from behind, and we got a fourth line guy out there, and we take matching minors there. The other team's going to take that trade all night, right? Because we hit your best player, and we're going to play 4-on-4, right? And a game management, the best guys that are able to execute game management, and sometimes people are like, oh, it's marbles, right? You got 5 marbles in your left pocket, 3 in the other, right? So you got to try to match things out. And unfortunately at times, yeah, it looks that way, right? Perception sometimes is reality, but I think when there's certain acts in the game that don't belong in the game, you have to penalize them accordingly. I always understand there's going to be a response from the team to defend their player if he's hit from behind or is a cheap shot, a knee, whatever. But the only way you're going to stop those type of acts is if you just penalize that particular team, right? Or make sure that you're putting that team down a guy.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, at the end of the night, your team may be playing a team that's not as strong, is not as deep. And they're going to try to do that. Maybe they're not as good, defensively. And that's where you see a guy stick out a knee. And sometimes there's unfortunate things, what have you. But from a game management perspective, right, it's the other part of it is like calling the right penalties, but it's also communicating with the teams, letting them know, hey, we recognize that act was not acceptable. And you kind of build some trust with the players, because then they know if you're calling those type of particular penalties and awarding that power play, they know that maybe they don't have to go and necessarily jump someone or defend themselves as vigorously as well, right? So, some teams will be like, hey, that's fine. If they're going to be stupid all night, you can put us on the power play all night. We're going to take those opportunities, right? We covet those opportunities. So, long answer short, it's is there an exact science? No. But the score of the game has something to do with it, right? And I know people always say, well, a penalty is a penalty is a penalty. Well, if we're calling a weak interference in overtime, right? Like, we want to make sure we're calling penalties that matter, penalties that have consequence within the game, right? And we tell our guys, we're calling good penalties. I'd almost rather us call a 3-minute penalty. And to your listeners, it's got to be obvious. It's got to be
Hmm.
taking away a scoring opportunity. It's got to be something dangerous, a dangerous foul, right? Something greasy where a player is taking advantage or a liberty against somebody, right? Those are the times, and
Okay.
it's funny, right? You watch a playoff game, and everyone always says, whether it's a Stars fan or whoever else around the league, they always say the officiating is different in the playoffs.
Yes.
And I think yes and no. I think yes, it is because the stakes are so much higher. Those officials are trying to move on to the next round, no different than the team. So if you make a couple crappy calls, um, or you non-calls, or you miss something significant, guess what? Your playoffs are done, right? And not only from a progression of career progression, it's money, right? Those officials earn bonuses for every round they get, right? So from the first round to the second round, they're getting compensated more. Plus, they just like the players, right? They want to get to the Stanley Cup. That's the ultimate goal. You want to be that best guy. You want to be the official that's working that game seven, right? You want to be a Wes McCauley. You want to be a Gord Dwyer, one of the top guys, and a Chris Rooney, right? A top people that you can recognize when you see the game on television. It doesn't mean you always have to agree with them or like them, but the experience they carry and what they bring in terms of communication and overall experience, those are why those guys are successful. But it goes back to they don't want to mess up, right? No
Right.
different than the players. The goaltender doesn't want to let in a cheap goal. Ottinger doesn't want to let in a 50-footer, right? We don't want to call bad penalties. We don't want to, make those mistakes. And sometimes the difference between a team moving on and officials moving on, it's razor thin, right? The calls at the blue line, right? And now with the video replay, that's kind of saved some guys bacon at time, but it's all about putting yourself in the right place, the right sight line to be able to make those decisions, right? And I give those guys a ton of credit because the stakes are so high. It's emotional, the atmosphere, everything's riding on that. And again, whether your team wins or loses the game, you can have your opinion of the situation, but um, it goes back to building trust to those teams and those
Sure.
players that you're going to call those penalties that are needed, and depending on their angle, what they're seeing or not seeing, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not good, right? We've all seen it where, like we talked about earlier in the call, you're watching something and guess what? There's seven different angles, right? They're showing you replays, and the broadcast is just ripping them. And I get that, but maybe we don't have that angle. Maybe we're blocked out on the ice for whatever reason, right? So yeah, it's all about sight lines. It's
Yeah.
all about working to get the right call. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's, razor thin things, right? That's why certain teams move on. That's why certain officials move on. And unfortunately, sometimes officials don't move on.
One of the things I love about your career, Keith, as it continues on, is so many different leagues. And I don't look at that as jumping around, as you mentioned, learning along the way. And to be a part of history, to be the first North American referee to work in the KHL must have been absolutely fascinating. The other aspect is from a language standpoint, how tough was it for you? And I give you a ton of credit because moving outside our comfort space is difficult in life. And you certainly not only moved, you jumped outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was interesting. The opportunity showed itself in August of that particular year. I got an email from USA Hockey's referee in chief at the time and goes, "Hey, the KHL's contacted us as a federation. They would like to speak to you about an opportunity. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess so, right?" And at the time, right, I was a long tenured official in the American Hockey League, and obviously the American Hockey League's a great league,
Yeah,
and I was proud to work there. And many of the players that you see at American Airlines, right? They've come through the American
sure.
Hockey League, right? They're down in Cedar Park playing in the American League, building their skill set, whatever. So I mean that was awesome, and to have that opportunity, I was really taken back because for them to acknowledge, and say, hey, we want you to come over and to work our league. And honestly, what they were offering National Hockey League money, right? Like ultimately my goal, when I got deep into officiating, I wanted to graduate to the National Hockey League, right? And I was knocking on that door as a prospect, and whether it was timing or whatever, unfortunately that didn't come to fruition. But when they came to me with the offer and said, hey, we'd love for you to come over, what have you, I thought about it, and decided, hey, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And um their season starts so early, right? Like they start like mid-August compared to obviously us in the National Hockey League or American League starting in October. So it took some time for me to get my work visa and everything like that. So I didn't get over there till mid-October. And I can remember stepping on the ice, and you start running into familiar faces, right? There was former NHLers, Russian NHLers that were playing, right? Like Max Afinogenov, who played for Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the ice there. Ran into former Dallas Star Radulov, right? And
Yeah.
well, he was funny. He goes, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, I go, I think I'm lost, right? He starts laughing, but you run into some familiar faces. There's some former NHL, American League guys, and it was kind of surreal, right? Like skating, for instance, I worked one of the nights I worked a game with Red Army versus Moscow Dynamo, right? And those are two proud clubs, and they were retiring um, Sergei Fedorov's number. And so you had these guys out there, like I'm like, oh, I saw this guy on television. You know what I mean? So it was just
Yeah.
it was surreal to see some of these people and in their environment, their element. And honestly, the hockey was different. Bigger rink, more skill, almost reminded me of a soccer match in the term of like, in North America, we'll dump and chase the puck, and we'll go in and try to crash and try to get something going with the cycle. These guys, if they didn't have a play, they would bring the puck back, and the game was very methodical, and it was very east west, and um, high skill, high speed, but just like the fans, how invested, right? It was like a soccer game, right? There's chants and flags and drums, and it was just everything was different. And the toughest thing, if any of your listeners have seen how big their country is and how many teams, we were traveling different time zones, right? Like I was either on a plane, a train, or in a car, and their their great idea at the time was they were trying on my contract. They had me contracted for 70 games. So obviously, me being about a month and a half late into the season, they wanted to try to catch me up. So essentially, I was working skate Friday, get on a plane after the game or a train, and get to the next city. And I was just working either every day or every other day. And, a couple times where you land, I've been land in Siberia, and let's say you would think it's 9 in the morning, it was actually noon, and we had a 3 o'clock game. Like my time clock was twisted,
Wow.
and it was a lot. It was a lot to get up to speed, and it was crazy, right? And um, one of the toughest things was trying to acclimate myself to the other officials, because ultimately, whether I knew it or not at the time, I was taking someone else's job, right? Maybe there was another guy that was in the Russian, let's say American League, the a lesser level,
Yeah.
that and they brought me in. So from my experiences in double IHF, when we did have Russia a part of that, I got to work with some very good Russian officials. And when I shared the ice with them, like they treated me great. They were great to communicate with. But again, there was nights where I'm in a room and I'm not even being spoken to, right? And like they wouldn't even try to accept me because maybe I was taking their buddy's job, or maybe perhaps taking an opportunity away from someone else. So there was challenges both on and off the ice, and it was tough at times, and it was tough to try to find that normalcy, right? It was kind of a lonely existence of living out of a Courtyard Marriott in downtown Moscow and just constantly on the go. And it was cool, but it was tough. I don't know if I would do it again.
Sure.
I had other offers. I could have went to Germany to skate, which probably would have been better, but I didn't. And obviously, I had a cup of coffee over in Denmark, which was refreshing because it was easier to acclimate. But it was an incredible experience. The hockey was awesome. It was cool to run into certain people and players and stuff like that. And it's funny. Some of the players, hey, are you getting paid? What are you getting paid? Or hey, yeah. And guys are like, yeah, I just got a bag of money. And it's some of the stuff you hear on other platforms talking about players losing their money or hiding their money in their pants and all that stuff. Yeah, that's some of that stuff was accurate. So
Wow.
it was kind of crazy to be in that environment and live through it, but no, you know what, it was a once in a lifetime experience, and to be able to do that, and honestly, I've been fortunate to skate around the world, right, and work in Sweden and
Yeah.
Finland, Switzerland. Like I've been blessed, and trust me, if I go back to my original, in the beginning of being a goaltender who hated officials and thought they were idiots and didn't know what they were doing. And then next thing you know, I'm that idiot that doesn't know what he's doing on the ice in different countries and trying to learn different languages. It kind of came full circle. So I'm extremely blessed to be able to have those experiences, and ultimately I try to share those experiences with our up and coming officials, right? And try to ignite their passion to be the best official they can be and try to chase their dreams as well. And I've found this job to be very rewarding because there's been some really good officials that have gone on. That some of our officials have graduated right to the National Hockey League, the American League, the ECHL, international, good college hockey, right? Guys are working the bean pot in Hockey East, and
Sure.
other guys that are working double IHF tournaments now. To me, that's just as rewarding as some of the stuff that I was able to do. So for me to be able to share some of my knowledge and try to inspire them and learn from them as well, because everything's different, right? They have their perspective, and obviously try to help them with, the things they go through, and ultimately try to, miss some of those potholes that maybe I hit on the way up, or, what could have I done differently, or trying to, just kind of help navigate them through some of those challenges that maybe they're facing within their current career.
So whether it's players or coaches that I interview or play-by-play announcers or reporters covering a team, I always ask, and you have thousands in mind with your 30 years of experience, best barn.
Ooh, um, I got to work at the World Championships. It might have been 2012 or 2013. I got to work in Stockholm, and I got to work Sweden versus Russia, and I can remember it sold out, 18,000 there. I think it's called the Avicii Arena now, right after the DJ, Swedish DJ, and the Globe in there. It was packed to the rafters, and it was kind of a pinch me moment in the fact that you had Zetterberg, Malkin, Datsuk, and on the other side, right, Carlson and Alfredson, and like you're looking around, and it's kind of sobering because you're like, wait a second, like you still have a job to do.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's kind of like fantasy camp, right? You see guys go to like baseball or they go to a hockey fantasy camp, and it's, yeah, this is cool. Hey, there goes Madonna. It's like, no, like we got a job to do. So, working there in front of that many people, I was fortunate to work the gold medal game between Russia and Finland in 2014 in Belarus. And it was crazy because um, leading into that game, us trying to get into the building, right? Usually we arrive at the rink about an hour and a half before. So we go in maybe a little bit earlier because of security was so tight. Well, uh, Vladimir Putin was attending the game, right, to cheer on Russia. And it took us legitimately an additional 20 minutes to get into the rink. Like they emptied our referee bags. We had dogs around us sniffing us. Like it was kind of surreal, right? Like just the security
Oof.
to get into the rink. And then one of the first stoppages of the first period, they put Putin and the Belarusian president Lukashenko up, and they're waving everyone, and the crowd's going crazy, right? And it's just like, you look around. I got Malkin's on the ice, Ovechkin's on the ice, Sergei Bobrovsky's in net. They're playing against Finland, so it's like Olli Jokinen, Pekka. Like it was kind of like wow, right? And to be able to work that type of game, and ultimately Russia ended up winning the game, and the Finns weren't too happy with us, I guess. But I still get some mail every once in a while. Thankfully, it doesn't come to my inbox, but it goes to my spam or some threats. But no, those kind of things, right? It's surreal, right? It's just to be in that type of environment with that type of caliber of
Yeah.
player, and just their passion for their country and how hard they play. It's cool to be able to see it from the on ice level, right? And again, I was very fortunate to have some of those opportunities to be on the ice with some of the best players in the world, and I certainly never took that for granted, and certainly try to use some of those examples, right, to inspire some of the
Sure.
guys and gals that we work with, because it is possible, right?
Yeah.
I was just a goalie with a bad attitude at the time from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I graduated to be able to do some stuff. So um, very
Is it when you
very fortunate.
when I say favorite barn, Keith, does that equal the ice surface, favorite ice surface?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
atmosphere, just all of it, right? The
Okay.
quality of hockey and stuff like that, right? There's been some cool places to be able to work, even the American League, like you work in Cleveland, right, which is essentially an NBA
Yeah.
building, and it's packed to the
Lake
rafters.
monsters.
So just be able to work some of those places, but yeah, just
Specifically
you
for
know,
you, I bet Hershey's special.
Hershey was awesome. Yeah, I mean, similar almost, I would say, to Montreal. Very knowledgeable fan
Yeah.
base, and packed, right? Whether it's a Sunday at 6 p.m., they're sold out, or a
Awesome.
Wednesday night, like they're packed, right? And the fans are savvy. They're not stupid. They know what a penalty is and what a penalty isn't. So no, there was cool. But even like, listen, I go back to my days like in the lower minor leagues, right? Working in Pensacola or Biloxi or freaking Lubbock, Texas, right? Like
Yeah.
every building was unique. Every place had a story, and it was cool to be able to. I went to places in my hockey journey, like I could check off all the different states and different cities, and I look at it, I'm like, otherwise I would have never hit some of these places, right? Skating a game in Bozeman, Montana, right? Like I would have never had that on my bingo card,
Sure.
or just some of the different cities. Like, yeah, it was crazy, and I think that was I tell our guys this, right? Like, when you're working your way up, like, take in the experiences, not only the game, but the city, right? What does it have to offer, right? And, some are official, they go to Rapid City, right? Are you going to go to the monument? Like, explore, go out. Don't just sit in a hotel room. Don't just sit there and play video games all day. Like, get out, immerse yourself in the different attractions around the country, because there's so many different cool things that you can see. And by the way, you're traveling on someone else's dime, and maybe, just maybe, you won't come back to some of these places. And no offense, maybe there's some places you don't want to go back to, but
Right.
it's a cool thing to be able to do, when someone's paying your way, and to be a small part of the game, and to be able to experience that. You can't put a dollar, a sum on that, right? It's very fortunate to travel throughout the world, and even just our country, and
Yeah.
to see some of the things, and just experience certain things. I mean, St. John's, Newfoundland, right? Just being out there, and their passion for hockey, and
Absolutely.
the nightlife, and just, yeah, like it's you know what I mean? It's there's some great places that
Well,
you can hit as an official.
I wanted to ask about, you mentioned nightlife as we wrap this up. I got a couple more questions for you. Nightlife, like, has there been a game and then afterwards someone says, your face looks familiar, or I was at that game?
Yeah, no, it depends, right? Depends on the city. Sometimes the more the deeper the hockey hotbed, right? Or the wherever you're at, people aren't stupid. You sometimes you run into some really good people that want to buy you a beer, and then you have other people that want to question you for a call, or what have you. But no, every once in a while our paths will cross with fans, and I would say this: the coolest thing I would say was, and I know the dynamic has changed, the way the game has changed, was, in times in the American League and the ECHL. you could go up, do the game, maybe bang up the game, maybe not have your best game, whatever, and both teams would end up at the bar with you after the game. And for the most part, guys were pretty good. You know what I mean? Like you share some drinks and some stories, and we were all, whether it was ECHL or in the American League, like guys are trying to work their way up, right? And we're all kind of in together. And those were some cool experiences, right? And you build those bonds, right? With the players and stuff like that, and sharing stories. And they're not that much different than what we are. Obviously their teams, they got 20 guys and two goalies, and our staff is the size of what it was, whether it was 80 referees and so many linesmen, what have you. But you build those relationships over time, right? Whether it's at a bar or a restaurant, you run into people, what have you. And just trying to go about your business the best way, during
Sure.
the game. But yeah, every once in a while you intersect, and most of the time it was positive experiences. Every once in a while, maybe there was someone that wasn't too happy about what happened in the game, or
Right.
what have you, and we remove ourselves from those from those situations, because sometimes, as you mix in some alcohol and
Yeah.
some frustration, it can't be. It's not a good environment.
Not
So,
to
but
mention head on a swivel when you're going out to your car.
yeah, no, it's yeah, there was some interesting times at times, but
Wow.
for the most part, no, it was pretty positive. And if it wasn't positive, we were getting out of Dodge.
Okay, let's end on this story then. I mean, thousands upon thousands of games for you. There has to be. I always wonder, because chirping in the NHL is like no other sport. The jawing that goes back and forth. I'm always surprised that a linesman or referee doesn't crack, because, and maybe you guys do, and it's just not caught on camera a lot. But there,
We do,
it
yes,
must
yes.
be like there's truly an art to it, and there are some guys that are so amazing. Like, Craig Ludwig was my co-host for years on this program, and just the simplest things, I could say one thing, and for the next year, that's all he would go after me for.
Oh yeah.
And, I mean, Craig's one of the best at it. And there are so many. Are there some chirping stories that just make you have to turn your head and say, oh boy, that's really good?
Oh, I mean, you know what the challenge was like in the American League, you would get some higher profile guys sent down, right? And whether they're there on a conditioning stint, or maybe they're on the latter half of their career, right? I can remember like a Mike Commodore coming down,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Mike's really good.
And that guy he was a beauty, just the things that came out of his mouth, which probably we can't repeat on the air. But um, those guys are so, like, they're so savvy, like, and they just, you know, I dealt with Paul Bissonnette, right? When Biz was down in the
Sure.
American League. And I can remember one night, he, like, on the Saturday night, usually when you go out to St. John's, Newfoundland, right? The team would play a Wednesday, Thursday off, Friday, Saturday. So by Saturday, right, going back into, a 9-period game, right, things get a little bit testy. And I can remember him doing something dumb in the second period of the Saturday game and me tossing him. And he's like yelling at me. And I'm like, hey, listen, you're the first guy to get to the shower, and you can get down to George Street. Like, you're going to be able to get to the martini bar a heck of a lot earlier than the rest of us, right? So it's just you trying to manage those guys too, because they kind of carried the game, right? Like I said earlier, talking about, during the lockout when some of the NHL guys came down, some of the younger guys want to make those guys, they want to make a mark right on the game. They want to make a name for themselves. So they go after those guys. So, and those guys, with some of the stuff they would say, it's just, yeah, it's, what, I'm surprised guys don't crack up more. You know, I, I think the one thing that I was fortunate in my career that helped me significantly was just my communication skills, right? And me being able to inject some humor every once in a while to a situation to try to bring a little bit of calm. And I can remember um, it was business team, they were playing in Manchester, right? The Manchester Monarchs,
Yep.
when they were the King's Farm team. And their coach was Mike Stuthers, and Stutzy is a great man. He's been up and down between, he's assistant in the National Hockey League, down in the American League. And you talk about doing our homework. I didn't do my homework very well, like reading the stat pack before the game, because little did I know he was a prolific tough guy for the Hershey Bears back in the day, right? And played in Philadelphia with the Broad Street Bullies, and was up and down, but certainly made his name with his fist. And at the time, the probably the season before he was in Manchester, he was coaching in the Western Hockey League. And here we are in the American League, and it's a Sunday afternoon game, and it's as you know, and probably your listeners know, that a Sunday afternoon in the minor leagues can either be a really good game, or they just don't want to play and they want to get out of there. It's like getaway day, right? Or the game can be just rough and rocky, right? Like they're tired, they're 3-3, and they're not happy to be there. And Stutzy's on the bench, and he's like chirping me, he's barking me and whatever. And I skate past him and I go, "This isn't the Western League. Go back to junior hockey." And he lost his ever loving mind. And he's like, "Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? I could sign your jersey to make it worth something." So I go into our locker room between periods, right? And usually we regroup, right? We'll have some water, Gatorade, whatever, and we'll talk about situations. Well, I picked up that stat pack and I start flipping through the stat pack. And I'm like, ooh, like, because it had his coaching statistics, which he was a very good coach, a championship coach, but also had his, like I said, his playing numbers and his PIMS, like very impressive, right? And he
Sure.
played, early to mid 80s, and he was a tough guy. And it's funny how the hockey gods work. I was going to have Manchester the following Friday in Binghamton, and we go out on the ice, and I'm like, you know what, I gotta make this right. So I skate over to the bench before both teams come out, and I go, Stutzy. He goes, yeah. I go, listen. I go, I want to apologize. I go, I shouldn't have said what I said, and I'm sorry I disrespected you. And I said, I'm not sure if you have a Sharpie on you, but if you could sign my sweater here, it's EITH, Keith. And he starts laughing, and he goes, "Get out of here, have a good game." And honestly, like, we had the best relationship after that, right? Like, he went to a couple other places. When the team moved west, right, when the American League migrated from the East Coast to the West Coast, right, to match up with their affiliates. He was coaching in Ontario, right, for the Reign, and we're on the ice again. This is ironic. We're in the ice in overtime, and the referee down low, who was an NHL contracted official, right? I was an American League guy, but this guy was under NHL contract, calls an absolute horse crap call, which leads to the game winning power play goal for Bakersfield. And in the configuration of the building, we've got to take this long walk. And unfortunately, we got to walk past the Ontario locker room.
Oh,
So we're walking down the way, and I can see Stutzy standing there. And I'm like, oh boy. And he's just standing there. I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to be good, right? And we have security, whatever. And he starts unloading on the referee, right? What was that effing call? You think you're gonna go somewhere with this? Blah, blah. And like the other kid just like keeps his head down, keeps walking. And he looks at me, goes, "Good to see you, Keith. Travel safe." And it was just funny though, because it was just like, here's this big imposing guy who originally, when I started the relationship, I said something so stupid to a well-respected guy, and just being honest and being like, "Hey, you know what, can you sign this sweater?" And like, we had the best relationship afterwards. But those are the things people don't see, right? Building those relationships with those people, and trying to work through situations. And sometimes you get the benefit of the doubt, sometimes you don't. But there's a human side to it, and just owning up to your mistakes. And obviously, you don't want to be that guy that's owning up to every mistake multiple weekends, because guess what? You're not going to be on the ice very long at a certain level. But just learning from that and just being a human, right? And I think that's the last thing I can leave you with, is ultimately, but underneath that sweater, um, they're human, right? They're out there doing the best job they can, regardless of the level, regardless of the league, division, whatever it is, right? Like, we're all human. We're trying to do the best job we can, and that's something we ultimately take pride in, the North American Hockey League and our family of leagues, and working with, guys and gals that aspire to get to higher levels. So certainly that's what it's about. It's about being a good human, trying to be a good official, learn from your mistakes, getting those reps, getting those experiences, and no different than the players, right? Trying to earn a commitment to a higher level, and trying to chase your dreams. So
Frosty's on dinner on me, man. Gosh, this was a banger. Thank you so much. And I'll say it again, but Spits and Suds listeners know I say this all the time. Go check out an NAHL game. It's at North Richland Hills. Very, very cheap to get in. You see a great brand of hockey, and you'll see officials coming through the ranks and some great players. Ben Bishop played in the NAHL. Connor Hellebuck played in the NAHL. There's a long list of NHL players that played in the NAHL, not to mention the kids that go on to play in the NCAA, and the director of officiating for the NAHL with 30 years of amazing stories as an official. Keith Kaval, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Hopefully this won't be a one-timer, and you'll join us again in the future so we can get more stories out of you, because seriously, you are an amazing storyteller. You deserve a lot of credit for that.
no, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I think, what, your neck of the woods. There's some amazing hockey going on, right? And especially with the U18s coming to Frisco and
Yeah.
Allen coming up in April, that's going to be an amazing tournament. And to see tomorrow's stars, right? Tomorrow's NHL future stars, no different than when the tournament was there a couple years ago. I think that's great. But no, sincerely, thanks for having us on, and yeah, check out the North American Hockey League. In your neck of the woods there. I think the hockey's great. There's a lot of passion. There's a lot of good things going on within our game and our league, and players moving on to the next level, and officials. And, we play a small part of it, and, we're proud of what we do, and certainly thankful for what the league gives us in terms of resources to make that happen. But thanks again for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, my pleasure, my friend. That's Keith Kaval, and that does it for another episode of Spits and Suds. Thank you for listening, everyone. We'll be back with another episode soon. Until then, have a great day, everyone.